The Chronicle of Veliki Novgorod has always held a special place among the ancient Russian cities. Throughout early Russian history, it competed equally with Kiev and later Moscow for the title of the capital of Rus. We learn this from school textbooks. However, ongoing excavations in modern Veliki Novgorod suggest that Novgorod on the Vol.IV River was never a major state and commercial center. Analysis of ancient annals and chronicles by Russian scientists shows that many entries contradict the generally accepted view of Russian history, particularly the history of Veliki Novgorod. So, what do we really know about this city? The city on the Vol.IV, known as the splendid Veliki Novgorod, the glory of all Rus, might be something more than just a city. Few people know that the chronology we live by was formed in the 16th century. It was during this time that medieval scholars tried to establish a global dating system. The officially recognized scale, named after the chronologist Joseph Scaliger, is known as the Scaligian chronology. Prominent scientists of the past, including Isaac Newton and academician Nikolai Morozov, pointed out significant errors in Scaliger's chronology, which distorted the entire picture of ancient and medieval history. The renowned chronologist of the 20th century, Beckermann, lamented the chaos of medieval dating. Therefore, the generally accepted version of world history is likely flawed, containing many stretches, omissions, and contradictions. Building a new, consistent concept of history is an extremely challenging task, and historians seem unable to tackle it without help from other sciences, particularly mathematics. Since 1973, academician Anatoly Fomenko, a mathematician from Moscow State University, has been analyzing ancient and medieval chronology. He has achieved several fundamental results in this field. In 1981, Gleb Nozovsky, a candidate in physical and mathematical sciences, joined the work on a new chronology. They concluded that the version of ancient and medieval history presented to us from school contained significant errors rooted in incorrect chronology. The aim of their scientific project, New Chronology, is to develop independent and reliable mathematical statistical methods for dating ancient and medieval events. Fomenko and his colleagues have created about 7 methods, based on processing large arrays of information from old texts, ancient authors' references, descriptions of eclipses, and more. These methods have been applied to real chronicles. In one of their series films, they detail the unique methods developed by Fomenko and Nozovsky, allowing for an objective analysis of events without relying on the Scaligian scale. In ancient documents, scientists have noted many strange inconsistencies that official history has ignored. Let's delve into some of these. The famous Archangel city chronicler notes that in 1434, Grand Duke Vasily Vasilyevich was defeated by Prince Yuri as a teenager, after which the Grand Duke fled from Novgorod to Kostroma and Nizhny Novgorod. The use of the word fled is rare, it usually implies a journey from Moscow to Kostroma through Veliki Novgorod. Another opponent also quickly fled from Rostov the Great to Kostroma through Veliki Novgorod. This makes no sense in the modern context, as Veliki Novgorod is not on the direct route from Moscow to Kostroma or from Rostov to Kostroma, making such detours completely pointless. Today, this area is traversed by a highway and a railway, yet the road remains virtually impassable, especially through the swamps. Historically, this route was only manageable in winter, but the chronicles refer to non-winter times, raising questions about the significance of Veliki Novgorod. In school textbooks, Veliki Novgorod is portrayed as a major city in Rus with a significant historical role. It is known as the place where the first Russian prince, Rurik, was invited to rule. Renowned figures like Saint Vladimir, Yaroslav the Wise, and Alexander Nevsky are associated with it. Chronicles indicate that Veliki Novgorod and Moscow were connected by a major road, as were Kiev and Vladimir Suzdal Rus. Grand dukes frequently traveled between these cities. However, considering the geographical isolation of Veliki Novgorod from Moscow and Kiev, it is puzzling. The city is hundreds of kilometers away from other historical centers, except for Pskov. Unlike typical major centers, which are surrounded by other cities and well-connected roads, Veliki Novgorod stands isolated. In attempting to understand this, one might refer to the chronicles. They suggest that Veliki Novgorod was the largest city in terms of public education and area in medieval Europe. It was a boyar republic with vast natural resources and unmatched trade turnover in Rus. As a member of the Hanseatic League, it was part of a northern European trade union. The famous trade route from the Varangians to the Greeks passed through Veliki Novgorod, connecting Scandinavia with Byzantium. To follow this route from the Baltic Sea to Veliki Novgorod, one would enter the Gulf of Finland, proceed to Lake Ladoga, and then navigate the Vol.IV River. From there, continuing south involved arduous travel unsuitable for trade. The chronicles suggest an impractical route, involving dragging boats across vast distances, which questions the accuracy of such descriptions. Moving forward, we know from chronicles that Veliki Novgorod was central to Rus trade with the West. Karamzin's history of the Russian state indicates that major international trade in Russia occurred near Yaroslavl at the mouth of the Volga River. There seems to be a contradiction between the chronicles and Karamzin's account. Let's consider Karamzin's version and examine the Novgorod Kremlin more closely. The Novgorod Kremlin, also known as the Detonets, is located in the heart of the city. The length of its walls is 1,350 meters. For comparison, the walls of the Trinity Sergius Monastery near Moscow are 1,250 meters long. The Boris and Gleb Monastery near Rostov-Veliki has walls stretching 1.5 kilometers, and the entire fortified city of Pskov spans 9 kilometers. Thus, in the context of Old Russian urban planning, the Novgorod Kremlin is relatively modest, akin to a sizable monastery. The most notable feature of the Novgorod Kremlin's architectural ensemble is the Street Sophia Cathedral. According to a guide to the Novgorod Kremlin, the cathedral has retained its original form since the 11th century and has never been rebuilt. As the Kremlin tour guide in Lokovsky Novgorod mentions, Street Sophia Cathedral is one of the oldest temples in our country, constructed around 1045. The cathedral will celebrate its 1,000-year anniversary in about 40 years. Despite its age, the cathedral has no significant shrinkage, and the surrounding cultural layer has only accumulated to about 2 meters. This is surprisingly small for such an ancient structure. In archaeology, the concept of a cultural layer refers to the accumulation of everyday and construction waste over time. In modern cities, cultural layers grow similarly, with new layers of asphalt being laid over old ones. This process was the same in the Middle Ages. Over centuries, the cultural layer in a city could accumulate to about 1 meter. Archaeologists have determined this growth rate by examining the layers of wooden pavements. The renowned explorer and head of the Novgorod archaeological expedition, academician Valentin Yanin, stated that the cultural layer in the Middle Ages grew at a rate of 1 centimeter per year. From the mid-10th century to the end of the 15th century, this amounted to a growth of 5.5 meters. If we calculate based on this growth rate, the cultural layer in Vol.IV Novgorod suggests the city was founded in the 15th century. Since the cultural layer around the Street Sophia Cathedral is just 2 meters, it implies the cathedral might date to the 17th century, contradicting its supposed ancient origins. This raises questions about why the true age of the architectural structure might have been obscured. Moving on from the chronicles, much is known about the Novgorod court from guides to the Novgorod Kremlin. The Lord's Court in the Novgorod Kremlin is described as an outstanding complex of civil architecture, housing administrative and business services. It was the residence of the Novgorod Archbishop, the owner of a vast treasury, and where the Council of Lords met to conduct domestic and foreign policy for Novgorod the Great. The Lord's Court was created under a single plan, embodying a new and remarkable urban planning phenomenon in Russian culture, a self-sufficient state within a state. The court included all necessary facilities, from kitchens and workshops to baths, forges, wells, stables, warehouses, and cellars. Contemporaries marveled at the numerous chambers and passages, and the Metropolitan's Palace was a massive 3-story building stretching along the entire Kremlin wall. Today, the Novgorod Kremlin is closely associated with the historical rulers and the high-ranking clergy of Novgorod. Next to Street Sophia Cathedral is the Nikitsky Building, a 17th-century structure. Nearly all the buildings we see today were constructed in the 17th century or later. Even if we assume older buildings existed and were destroyed, it's hard to imagine such a grand and self-contained state fitting into this small area for centuries. The chronicles describe it as an ordinary courtyard with small 17th-century buildings, similar to those found throughout Moscow and other cities. The only notable structure from the archbishop's era is the so-called faceted chamber. According to the Novgorod Chronicles, this chamber was built in 1433 by a master named Marian German craftsman, commissioned by Archbishop Euthemius II. The existing Vladikny chamber, however, appears to be a typical 17th-19th century building, with nothing resembling the grandeur of a 15th century masterpiece that required such extensive effort to construct. The faceted chamber, now an ordinary house, supposedly had 30 doors, which seems implausible given its current form. Unlike the famous faceted chamber in the Moscow Kremlin, which boasts impressive granite details, the one in Novgorod lacks any distinctive architectural features. This raises questions about the true nature of the building, as the chronicles make no mention of significant alterations. Despite its modest exterior, the faceted chamber's interior was historically significant. It was Russia's first diplomatic hall, hosting ambassadors from the Grand Prince of Moscow and foreign dignitaries. It witnessed numerous historic events, including Ivan the Terrible's decree on the annexation of Novgorod. However, during Ivan the Terrible's infamous campaign, where he brought 10,000 oprichniki to Novgorod, historians report a bloody massacre resulting in 3,000 deaths. Yet, archaeologists have not found mass graves from that period, raising doubts about the recorded events. We've been taught about the famous Novgorod Vech since school, which supposedly gathered in the Yaroslav court. According to Karamzin, 10,000 Novgorodians would assemble at the call of the Vech bell. However, modern research suggests the Yaroslav court could only accommodate about 50 people, implying significant exaggeration. If only the highest-ranking individuals attended, it would not have been a true Vech. Many aspects of Veliki Novgorod's history, as presented in chronicles and school teachings, do not align with the archaeological and architectural evidence. Remember the term layer cake, which archaeologists first used in Novgorod. According to traditional history, Veliki Novgorod was founded in the 10th century on the Vol.IV River. Given the swampy terrain, the city required substantial paving. Academician Valentin Yanin notes that every 30 years, Novgorodians laid new pavements over the old ones, which were preserved in the damp clay soil. Over 550 years, this created 28 layers of well-preserved pine flooring. Each subsequent layer of pavement contained trees that grew simultaneously with those in the previous layers. By comparing tree ring thickness, which varies based on environmental conditions, archaeologists can date these layers. This method, known as dendrochronology, provides a timeline of events based on tree growth patterns. Yanin's team applied this technique, and their results are widely trusted. The excellent preservation of the lower layer of Volkhov pavements indicates it was the first layer. If previous layers had existed and rotted away, they would have left a gradual transition of decayed material, but the first layer remains well preserved. This suggests it was laid relatively recently, around the time asphalt paving began in the mid-20th century, pointing to a first layer dating back to approximately 1400. This finding challenges the traditional dating of Novgorod from the 10th century, suggesting instead that significant urban development began in the 15th century. This raises questions about the missing pavements from the 15th to the 20th centuries and why they are not preserved. Academician Yanin's work on Novgorod's archaeological site relied on dendrochronology. By studying the logs used in church foundations, whose construction dates are known from chronicles, they established a timeline for the city's pavements. However, these dates were not independently confirmed. The evidence suggests that while ancient pavements are well preserved, more recent ones are not. This discrepancy requires further investigation. Critics argue that the dendrochronological findings contradict the traditional chronology of Veliki Novgorod, positing that the first settlement in this area should be dated no earlier than the 15th century, rather than the 10th. It is known that a settlement existed on the site of modern Novgorod on the Volkhov River, built as a fortress during the war with the Swedes in the 17th century. Chronicles from that period indicate that locals called the area Pochinki rather than Novgorod. A guide to the Novgorod Kremlin states that from the 14th to the 16th centuries, the entire area was referred to as Pochinki except for the Lord's Court, with the name being used in place of Novgorod. This text, while trying to justify the name, adds to the confusion about the true history of Novgorod. So, if Novgorod on the Volkhov is a recent development, where was the original Veliki Novgorod? Let's recall Grand Duke Vasily Vasilyevich and revisit the clues. One glance at the map suggests that Great Kol might refer to Yaroslavl, due to its significant position on routes from Moscow to Kostroma or Rostov. Yaroslavl, with its steep banks of the Volga and deep ravines, forms a naturally fortified island and was a major city in Russian history. Yaroslavl is the largest city on the Upper Volga. Its high and steep banks create a natural fortification, making it an ideal location. It was strategically located on the ancient route from Vladimir Suzdal Rus to Western Europe via the White Sea. This route intersected with another significant route along the Volga near Yaroslavl, making it a key transit point between Moscow and various directions such as Siberia, Mangazaya, Arkhangelsk, Western Europe, and the East. Historian Karamzin noted that the main trade in Russia at that time occurred at the mouth of the river Taksa near Yaroslavl, at the intersection of the Syeverodvinsk and Volga routes. The Syeverodvinsk path connected the Baltic Sea through the White Sea to Veliki Ustyug, Vologda, and the Volga. The Volga route connected to the south and east, linking to trade caravans from China and India, making Yaroslavl a central hub in Eurasian trade. Deacon Timofey Kamenevich Orlovsky, a 17th-century historian, described Yaroslavl as a major trade center where merchants from various states, including Germany, Poland, Lithuania, Greece, Rome, and Persia, conducted business. The ships were so numerous that people could cross the Volga by stepping from one ship to another. The auction took place on Malahov Meadow, a vast area bustling with trade activity. Navians also traded with Russia through Kolmogary, an old Russian port on the White Sea, which maintained its significance until the founding of St. Petersburg. They traded with Yaroslavl, where foreign merchants had established shops. Dutch, French, Germans, Italians, Spaniards, and even Chinese traders were present, bringing a wide variety of goods. In the 17th century, Yaroslavl was the second largest city in Russia, only after Moscow. It was a crucial trading hub where Western Eurasia brought silver, and various goods were delivered to the Yaroslavl auction. Trade was conducted through a Russian monetary system, requiring a fee for reminting silver, which amounted to about 10 to 15% of the total value. These duties significantly contributed to the Russian treasury, often measured in pounds. The first silver mine in Russia began operations at the end of the 17th century. Before this, all Russian silver came from imports. Yaroslavl's significant deposits of Arabic coins, known as cubic coins, indicate its role as a center of international trade. However, despite the evidence of extensive trade and wealth, Yaroslavl remains a city full of historical surprises that challenge official narratives. Assumption Cathedral in Yaroslavl was built in the 17th century but was completely destroyed in the 20th century. Today, excavations have revealed an older brick foundation under the altar, which belonged to a cathedral destroyed in the 17th century. Alongside this discovery, archaeologists found a massive grave containing the remains of many people, predominantly women and children, likely victims of a military conflict. However, according to official history, Yaroslavl was never taken by the enemy, even during the Batu Khan invasion, and there are no known records of such a massacre in medieval Yaroslavl. This leaves historians unable to explain this burial. In contrast, Veliki Novgorod, as chronicled, should have numerous mass graves, but none have been found in Novgorod on the Vol.IV. Notably, even during the tumultuous times when Minyan and Pashersky entered Yaroslavl, there were no records of significant battles or mass graves from the 16th century. However, under the foundations of a 17th century church, bones were found that predate the 20th and 19th centuries, suggesting they are from the 16th century. According to scientists Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nozovsky, the history of Veliki Novgorod might have been taken from Yaroslavl and wrongly attributed to Novgorod on the Vol.IV. Unlike the small 17th century fortress in Novgorod on the Vol.IV, Yaroslavl was a well-fortified city with 24 towers on its ramparts in the 17th century. These towers, though mostly without walls today, indicate the city's past fortifications, dismantled in the 18th and early 19th centuries. The numerous towers in Yaroslavl without walls raise questions. Historical science suggests Yaroslavl was not destroyed, and its powerful wooden fortifications burned down in the mid-17th century. After a fire in 1658, many towers and walls were not rebuilt, as standalone towers without walls were not practical fortifications. This fits the hypothesis that Yaroslavl could be the true Veliki Novgorod, whose fortifications were systematically dismantled in the late 16th century to deprive the city of its defenses, leaving useful towers standing as outbuildings. The authors of the new chronology propose that Veliki Novgorod referred to a region rather than a single city. This region, including Yaroslavl, Rostov, Kostroma, Peroslavl, Vladimir, and Suzdal, was the capital until it moved to Moscow. Veliki Novgorod, as we understand it now, encompassed the area between the Oka and Volga rivers, known as Vladimir Suzdal Rus. In a narrow sense, Veliki Novgorod might specifically refer to Yaroslav's courtyard in Yaroslavl, a significant meeting place where important decisions were made, as mentioned in the chronicles. Scandinavian sources also support this, with the 17th century Swedish cartographer Olof Magnus referring to Veliki Novgorod as a country of cities, depicted as such on contemporary maps. This suggests that Veliki Novgorod was not just a city but a broader region with interconnected ends, each with its own head and seal, sometimes meeting in Yaroslavl to resolve key issues. Here is a fragment of Olof Magnus's map. Notice that the area of Veliki Novgorod is located east of Moscow and is marked with the symbol of princely authority, which aligns well with Yaroslavl but not with the location of Novgorod on the Volkhov. Unfortunately, the map from the Swedish cartographer ends here. In Sigismund Herberstein's renowned book, Notes on Muscovy, one of the earliest editions from Vienna in 1557, an enlarged fragment of the northwestern part of the map catches the eye. The name Veliki Novgorod is prominently displayed but is not accompanied by a city symbol. All other cities on this map have small illustrations with symbols indicating their exact locations, except for Veliki Novgorod. The upper part of the map, which should correctly depict the region, shows Veliki Novgorod in an incongruous position. The map's engravings can be edited, and it appears that adjustments were made to alter the original depiction. In our series, we delve into the falsifications in historical science that significantly influenced our understanding of the past. According to the authors of the new chronology, up to the 17th century, The civilized world was united within a single, vast state. At the beginning of the 17th century, this state disintegrated, giving rise to many independent small states. An intentionally distorted version of chronology, known as the Scaliger version, emerged, forming the basis of modern historical textbooks. Our methods reveal that this chronology contains significant shifts, often repeating events and duplicating historical entities. Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nozovsky propose a version of world history that might initially seem fantastical. According to their theory, the Mongol Empire, the Empire of Charlemagne, the Great Arab Caliphate, the Roman and Persian empires, and other notable empires were actually different names for the same state, which they call Rus Horde. This great empire existed across Eurasia and North Africa, extending to America from the 13th to the 16th centuries. Its collapse, known in Rus as the Great Troubles and in the West as the Reformation era, led to fierce wars and the redistribution of borders. Local rulers, fearing the resurgence of the former imperial center, Vladimir Suzdal Rus, attempted to erase the memory of Rus's great past by relocating historical centers of power. This effort to rewrite history aimed to prevent the former powerful centers from restoring their influence. Understanding the profound impact of these actions helps to explain the discrepancies and gaps in historical records. The new chronology suggests that the actual centers of historical power were systematically downplayed or relocated in historical narratives to undermine their legacy. Revising history, some assert that ancient capitals were actually situated in entirely different locations, often in remote or convenient areas. They strategically established new narratives while denigrating the significance of the original, now destroyed centers. This tactic was particularly effective in reshaping Veliki Novgorod into a small provincial town, a narrative perpetuated by historians, even unwittingly. This ideological maneuvering played a significant role in the war against the Romanovs, who, once in power, acted as if they were foreign agents on the Russian throne. To eradicate the empire's memory, they vandalized monasteries, destroyed ancient texts, and defaced historical monuments, like the Spaso Andronikov Monastery's cathedral. The deliberate destruction of frescoes and other historical artifacts aimed to rewrite Russia's past, erasing symbols and events that contradicted the Romanov version. To the new chronology, this manipulation obscured the true history of a vast empire that once dominated half the world. Mathematicians like Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nozovsky argue that the widely accepted historical accounts are far from accurate, seeking to restore the truth about our past. Whether one agrees or disagrees with their theories, the central aim of the new chronology is to unveil the genuine narrative of history.